One of the things you might have noticed as we were analyzing mobile app screens and website screens and the web app is that a lot of elements I would kind of refer to as little boxes and like containers that contain other elements inside it. And that's exactly how Figma works, how web works. Everything's considered like a little box. Even oval shapes like circles are in a sense always boxes that we work with. So to demonstrate that, I'm gonna draw a frame, and you can see that the frame is basically like a little box, a little rectangle that has the width and it has the height, and it's positioned somewhere in the canvas. If we're thinking about our designs, and let's say we're just working on a screen like this, then a frame or any kind of element that we're going to have inside, be it a rectangle or anything else, is also going to be positioned based on a x and y axis, and we're always considering this top left point as our starting point, unless we're talking about the canvas, because the canvas is going to consider its middle point 0, 0, and we can always move things in the negative space as well. So just one thing to keep in mind, as long as we're not working directly on the canvas, which is just the frame that we would be designing on for our mobile app, web app, website, whatever we're designing, everything else inside of that frame that represents our screen is going to be based on the top left point of that frame. So you can now see that this rectangle that we have is moved to the from the left edge by 24 pixels and from the top by 88 pixels. We can also see that it has a width and it has a height. Same thing happens with a circle. If we draw a circle like this, it's going to have a width and height. It's not going to have like the radius or something. So it's still a box, and even if you tap on it like I clicked on this little circle right now, you can see that it has a bounding box around it that's actually kind of a square. So why that's important is because we need to think and analyze and kind of from this point onward think about all of the elements that we have on our screens as like little boxes that we're using as like little Lego boxes, and we're building our screen from them. So just think about it from that perspective, and I think a lot of the things that we're going to talk about later on are going to make a lot more sense. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are certain terms that we're using in design when we're thinking about things. So I'm just going to draw a frame like this, and all of our frames can also have fills. So basically, one thing that Figma also did for all of us is that we're rarely using rectangles anymore. There are still a couple of places where you're gonna start off with a rectangle or maybe use it in the end design, but most often it's just gonna be frame because it gives you a little bit more, again, flexibility, and things work more similarly to how they would in design. So basically anything that you can use a rectangle for, you can also use a frame for, and most often you're actually going to be using frames. So instead of you having to draw a rectangle like this and then place some text and say that this is a button, and then group these two elements together to create a button. So you have a group, we have a text, and we have a rectangle, and that's something that you might have done in other tools before. You would now just need a frame, and you can remove the rectangle and basically color that frame, and it's gonna be a button. So you can see that now we just have a frame that has a text inside of it, and that's more like how buttons would work on the web, because we now have some elements inside of this that I want to explain to you. So you can see that this text is inside of this main frame that kind of holds it together. We have spacing on the top and bottom that we call it padding, and there's also left and right padding. So anything inside of this element that's moved away from the content is the text inside, is the padding. Well, outside of this, if there was another button in here, then the spacing between those two would be called the margin. So it's like this one would have the right margin of 12, and this one would have the left margin of 12, or maybe it would have the left margin of 0, and this one would have the left margin of 24. But overall, both of those approaches would allow you to have a spacing between these buttons that's 24. And that spacing is a margin. It's like the space that's not occupied in a sense, while padding is the free space within the element. So if we had something, I'm going to demonstrate with rectangles just to make it a little bit more visual. I'm going to draw each one to be a little bit bigger. Let's just make this like 50 pixels smaller. And here, place it like that. And then make this one a little bit smaller and this one a little bit smaller. Place it inside. Have it like that, and there can also be an element inside. Okay, so if this is the main item that we have, main element, the main box, this inside of it would be content, and all of the spacing that you can see, like 70 something, is gonna be padding. It's inside of it. This element in here is considered like the stroke that happens when we have a layer like this. I can also draw it like that. It can go outside or inside, that depends on your preference. That's going to be a stroke, and then this is going to be the margin. So the outside element is going to be the margin. This is kind of the box model. You can Google it a little bit more if it's still not clear. But basically we have content, we have padding until the edges of our element. That element may or may not have a stroke around it, and that stroke can be either inside or outside. Most often on web, we wouldn't use center for elements because that's not how it works, but it's not something that you really need to worry about. Developers can help you always understand it a little bit better. And then outside space would be margins. And you can see that margin is not gonna affect the width and height, while padding is gonna affect the width and height. So if we have this element, and you can now see that the spacing on the left and right side is like 40 pixels, and on top and bottom is like 16. That means that this element is taking into account the height of this content that we have in here, and it's also adding bottom and top padding to the height and left and right padding to the width, and then this element has width and height that it has. If we add a stroke to it, it's not going to impact the width and height. We can also place it outside. And everything that happens outside of it until the next element appears, we would consider that like a margin that we can use for spacing things around. Besides that, so we went over a little bit of an intro into the box model. We went over the fact that we're not gonna use rectangles a lot in Figma. There is also one other tip that I wanna let you know, and I'm gonna use it often throughout this course, is that all of these elements inside, we can actually use matte inside of them. So like if we have width and you wanna make this just like 80 pixels smaller, you can just write it down like -80 plus 60 times 3 divided by 2. So math works in here, and it's something that you can really use to your advantage because you don't have to calculate sizes outside of Figma at all. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully it introduced some concepts that we're going to use a lot throughout this course. So I really hope that you went through this video carefully, you took some notes, and you tried to replicate the things that I was doing so that you can better understand what's happening with some of these layers, shapes, and frames inside of Figma.